Hello and welcome to the Irish History Boys with me, Cormac Moore.
And me, Tim McGarry. This is Cormac Moore's favourite episode because he gets to talk about his book and his favourite topic in the entire world, the Boundary Commission of 19...
Well, at the moment, it's my favourite topic.
At the moment, it's your favourite. 100 years ago, the boundary of Northern Ireland was still technically in dispute.
Oh, it was unsettled. Yeah, there was so the three boundary commissioners were meeting up at this time 100 years ago, all across contested areas and border areas, to decide where the new border should be. And they interviewed almost 600 people.
And this is a story that a lot of people don't know. We just assume the six counties happened and everything was sorted out after 1922. But 1925, we still don't know. Is Northern Ireland going to be 4 counties? Is it going to be 6 counties? What bits are going to go down south? What bits are staying up north?
And even some bits from the south were potentially going up north as well, from East Donegal and North Monaghan. So this episode, we're going to talk a bit about what the interviewees thought, what their contributions were.
I'm going to try and get him to shut up a bit because he does go on a bit about that.
The Irish Boundary Commission continued its sittings at Enniskillen yesterday. The Commission issued the following report in the evening. At today's sittings of the Irish Boundary Commission, further witnesses were heard in support of the claim put forward by a committee of nationalist inhabitants of County Fermanagh for the inclusion of the county in the Irish Free State. An English contemporary says, "It has become definitely known in well-informed political quarters in Belfast that the Irish Boundary Commissioners do not expect to finish their tasks of collecting evidence before the end of the present year. There will then be a long adjournment to enable the Commissioners to sift the evidence and prepare their report." That was from the Irish News on April 25th, 1925.
You're listening to the Irish History Boys with me, Tim McGarry, and Dr. Cormac Moore. We are discussing the Boundary Commission again and the Irish News report from April 25, 1925, 100 years ago this week. And again, the Boundary Commission is the big dominating story of the entire year. We've had a couple of chats about this before, but it is a story that is basically going to be every single week of 1925. It was the story because effectively the existence of Northern Ireland, the very existence of Northern Ireland, was technically under threat if the Boundary Commission, as some Republicans and Nationalists hoped, gave large chunks of what were the 6 counties, including Fermanagh, Tyrone, to the Free State. There was an argument that the Northern Ireland state would be unviable and, we'd have a united Ireland. That's not how it worked out, though. And here we have the Boundary Commission wandering around the boundaries of the border of Northern Ireland, holding different sessions. Can you tell us a little bit about what these sessions, what was happening at this, what was going on here? Because if we go back slightly for people who don't know the basics of the Boundary Commission, 1921, the treaty between the IRA and the British government basically gave the Republicans a free state, the freedom to achieve freedom, as Michael Collins, not an independent republic, but more or less their own government, their own parliament, their own army or whatever in the south of Ireland. Not quite a republic, but close to a republic.
Yeah, with a Dominion
status.
Yeah.
Northern Ireland, the 6 counties remained as part of the UK. Though, as part of the treaty, though, there was a clause, Article 12, which said that the boundary between Northern Ireland and the new Irish Free State would be determined by a boundary commission who would decide what the actual border would be, dependent on the wishes of the inhabitants. And what's the other clause? Which is
as long as they were compatible with geographic and economic conditions.
Compatible with geographic and which was the kicker at the end of
that's the one that Feetham, Justice Richard Feetham, the chairman of the Boundary Commission, he really honed in on the importance of. He actually said the wishes of inhabitants was the primary issue, but not the paramount issue. So what does that mean? So,
first, but not the most important.
Yeah, that's pretty much what. But it could be interpreted in different ways. But the way he interpreted was, we'll deal with it first, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily the most important. So
sorry. The treaty was signed in 1921.
Loads of delays, civil war
in the south of Ireland between 1922 and 1923. 1924, they finally to get the commission together, and it first meets in. Does it meet in 24?
Yeah, so it meets in November 6th, 1924 is the first meeting.
1924. Right. So who is this commission? Who's on it? Who do we know? Anybody? What's the crack with this boundary commission and who?
So the Justice Richard Freedom, he's a chairman. He was born in Penmouthshire, and in Wales, basically. And he went to Oxford, and then he ended up going to South Africa, and he lived in South Africa, and just been appointed to the Supreme Court there the year before. And then he was appointed. And actually, Robert Borden, who was a former Prime Minister of Canada, he had actually been offered the position of Boundary Commissioner, chairman, but he turned it down because the Northern Ireland government refused to cooperate with it, and he felt, unless the Northern Ireland government cooperated, I ain't getting involved. Right. So he didn't. So then it was offered to Richard Freedom. He accepted. The Irish Free State representative was O. McNeill.
Right.
So, a very famous scholar from the Glens of Antrim, and he
went to a very good school in North Belfast.
What school was that?
St Malachy's College. He was in
a very good school.
He has a blue
school,
plaque.
Yeah.
He has a blue plaque outside.
Okay,
yeah.
Right.
I mean, I have to die first before I get mine from St Malachy's, but yeah, Owen McNeill was an ex Malachian, and he was you say was a Gaelic scholar.
Yeah.
Very well known, most famous perhaps for being the man who tried to call off the Easter Rising of 1916 the day before.
Well, there's two things he's most famous for, or infamous for, was the countermanding order to stop the rising happening on Easter Sunday, and then obviously the Boundary Commission, because he didn't perform well, to put it mildly. And we obviously will be talking more about that in the weeks and months ahead.
So sorry, just to be clear, Feetham then he's appointed by the British government.
British government, yeah, which
right.
he's
the chairman.
This was a terminal error almost from Sinn Féin in agreeing to the British. British pretended they were kind of neutral, and they were kind of trying to stop these warring factions from fighting more, and they'll be the innocent kind of impartial go-between. They weren't. They were a big player in this, and they were supporting basically the Unionist side more than the Nationalist side, and that was very evident in the build-up to the Boundary Commission convening. But so the British got to appoint the chairman, who was Richard Feetham, and the Free State got their appointee was O. McNeill, who was also Minister for Education at the time, so he had a full-time job in the cabinet, whereas Feetham was totally devoted to the Boundary Commission, as was the Northern Ireland representative, who was Joseph R. Fisher. He wasn't appointed by the Northern government because they refused to do so, and so the British government had to pass legislation, and the Free State government had to pass simultaneous legislation to allow the British government to appoint the Northern Ireland representative, which it did in October.
So sorry, James Craig and the Unionists were saying this Boundary Commission was set up between Sinn Féin, Michael Collins, and the British government. Nothing to do with us. Leave us alone. We're our 6 counties. We're having our 6 counties. Leave us alone.
Well, Craig
we're
not
cooperating in case we lose. And the slogan was the slogan not an inch? Was that James Craig?
Yeah,
was
that his? But it was associated with him. Like I think many other people said it, but it's very much associated with James Craig.
So he was saying nothing to do with us. We're boycotting it. You work it out between yourselves. With threat being that if we don't like it, there'll be consequences. Is that fair enough? Or is that
there was a lot of threats, even at the time of the treaty. Like there was a meeting between Austin Chamberlain, he was in the cabinet. He was actually leader of the Conservatives at the time. He Craig said, "Look, we will oppose this whatever way we can." Almost like the threat that Bonner Law gave in 1912 was saying that we will support Unionists. In whatever means we need to support them. So there was this threat. There was this bill up for specials as well. There was a lot of hardline Unionists that were using very threatening language. Even English. There was we all remember a lot of English politicians and European politicians coming over to see this border. Why is this border in 2016 and afterwards? Same was happening in the build up to the Boundary Commission. A lot of English politicians were coming over from Westminster. What is this border? They're going on tours
in a field in Fermanagh.
Exactly.
Oh,
this is the border. Yeah.
Well, sorry, just to go back on that, because everybody kind of knows where the border is. If you're from Fermanagh, you're in Fermanagh, and you're not in Donegal or whatever. But the Northern Ireland state formed in 1921, and it's basically the 6 counties. So everybody goes, well, it's the county lines, and that's it. I mean, that's accepted, and it's so everybody knows that's what the Government of Ireland Act of 1920 creates the Northern Ireland state, gives them a parliament, and says this is your jurisdiction. It's the 6 counties.
Yeah, of course, but obviously English politicians weren't overly familiar with what was happening in Ireland. Never have been, and still don't. So they come over, but some of them use threatening language as well. Like, we will come over and we will arm ourselves, and Scottish people arm themselves, to protect Ulster Unionists. So there was very emotive language going around at this time, while the Boundary Commission was preparing to convene. If we move forward to March 25, that's what it was formed in November 24. The Boundary Commission. They met. They were based in Clements in London. That was their headquarters, and then they move over to just for a tour of the north, an informal tour of the different areas around the border, and that were up for discussion in December 24, and then they come back. So they gather loads of evidence, like from witness statements from both Unionists and Nationalists. Interestingly, the Northern government said they weren't going to submit any statement or evidence to the Boundary Commission, but it was okay if Unionists, did submit evidence, and even members, political representatives, members of local authorities, like Basil Brooke, for example, was involved in Fermanagh County Council. He submitted evidence as part of a delegation that met the Boundary Commission, and also behind the scenes, which was not known to the public, the Ulster Unionist Council was actually supporting the whole kind of case for Unionists to the Boundary Commission, supported by James Craig and Wilfred Spender. He was the cabinet secretary. So even though the Northern government publicly,
so they're officially boycotting it. They're officially boycotting
behind
it.
The scenes,
and they also have a man on the inside. This guy Joe Fisher, we were talking about.
Yeah.
Let's just go back to the Feetham is the chairman.
Yeah.
I think Nationalists later nicknamed him Cheatham Feetham. Is that right? Yeah.
I think Tim Healy, who was Governor General, apparently came up with that phrase. Cheatham Feetham. Yeah.
Good name. That's a kind of a Donald Trump name, that, isn't it? Cheatham Feetham, Crooked Hillary or whatever. Cheatham Feetham. I like that. Owen McNeill is the Southern Irish representative. He's a scholar. He's a minister for education. He's a bit airy-fairy as well, isn't he?
Oh, yeah, distant.
Distant
almost,
Distant would be the... but then the Unionist representative is not official Unionist representative, Joe Fisher, but he is really, because he's
He's from Down, he's steeped in Ulster Unionism, he was editor of the Northern Whig. He was, he's very close friends with Craig and Edward Carson. So he was, and he had been, not wouldn't say canvassing, but he'd been writing a lot of letters to the Times in London, in the build up the Boundary Commission, basically parroting the Ulster Unionist line of, the Government of Ireland Act was more important than the treaty. That should take precedence over the treaty. If there is going to be land given up, land should be given back. We should get Donegal, for example, and we can certainly give them the rough kind of Afghanistan areas like South Armagh. So what he was saying in 22, 23, 24 was pretty much what happened with the award, in terms of what was offered in the end. Like chunks of South Armagh were going to go to the Free State, parts of North Monaghan, parts of East Donegal were going to go to Northern Ireland. That was what he was been advocating beforehand. So he becomes the Northern Ireland representative. Now, Ramsay MacDonald officially, who was Prime Minister at the time when he appointed Joseph Fisher as the Northern Ireland representative, but it was actually Craig who suggest. First of all, he suggested Edward Carson, to be the Northern Ireland representative.
Right.
But there was a backlash within the Northern government. Craig wanted Carson, and Carson said he would do it, but there was backlash because there was still a lot of bitterness within Donegal, Monaghan, Cavan Unionists of Carson abandoning them.
Oh, because in 1912 it's all signed the Ulster Covenant. Pledging to do whatever they can to resist Home Rule, and then the Ulster Covenant was signed by anybody from Ulster, the 9 counties of Ulster, and then 3 of them were abandoned by Unionists. I think they were quite. My old colleague David Hume of the Orange Order told that there was a 50th anniversary of the signing of the Covenant in 1962.
Yeah, 72. And
a lot of Unionists from Donegal, Cavan refused, boycotted and refused to go. Still bitter about the fact that they were betrayed, signed this covenant, and then they were betrayed.
Yeah, so you had that kind of baggage with Carson, and there was a very interesting discussion. It was in the Northern Ireland cabinet meetings in late 24 when they were deciding who should they recommend to the British Prime Minister, as the Northern Ireland representative, obviously privately, and Carson or Craig was definitely pushing for it. Carson's been our biggest advocate. He's a well-established lawyer. He will be a very strong person to have on the commission. And if he's not going our way, he will publicly resign and all this stuff, and maybe we'll back him. But so other members are going like, what happens if we give up Newry? Like he'll be after what happened with Monaghan, Cavan, and Donegal. Is he going to be tainted again?
All right.
And Craig said, "Don't worry, Newry's not going to be removed." And all this is 24 before the Boundary Commission met. So it decided it's just too political and too dangerous for Cav Carson. So they go for a relatively unknown Fisher.
Joe Fisher. Right.
And it was like it's pretty certain that it was Craig who suggested to Ramsey MacDonald appoint Fisher.
Am I right as well? There was a boundary commission. There's a semi-judicial role to it, which some of them took seriously, and some of them do. In that they weren't supposed to talk about what you were doing. Fisher basically leaked everything that they were doing back to Craig via a source.
Yeah.
Owen McNeill said absolutely nothing. Didn't even tell the Irish cabinet what he was doing on a Tuesday or what he had for breakfast or what the Boundary Commission was doing. He said absolutely nothing. So the Irish government weren't aware of what was coming down the line. Is that right?
Oh, they had no idea. They were totally in the dark, and there was correspondence between say W.T. Cosgrave, the president of the Executive Council of the Free State. Correspondence of Cosgrave and Owen McNeill, and Owen McNeill says, I can't help you there, I can't do anything for you there, and so
if the people were writing to him going, what's going on here?
Yeah, but it was very bizarre because he was appointed by the Free State government, he was their representative, but he felt more loyalty to the Boundary Commission, which was just totally bizarre. And he did. He was totally confidential. So Cosgrave all along was going, the Free State can't lose any territory. That was the official Irish Free State stance.
You can't lose any territory.
Can't lose any territory. Can't lose part of Donegal or one hand. They're not up for discussion. That was the Free State government position, and it was obvious that Feetham did not agree with that. They were visiting parts of Monaghan and Donegal. They were taking submissions of people from those areas that want to be included in Northern Ireland. So it was clear that it was definitely up for discussion. But obviously, and then when it was, the three of them were talking and talking about giving the award, McNeill was not warning or telling them, look, this is up for discussion here. So you have this kind of strange position that the appointee of the Free State government is not telling the Free State government what's happening, and the Free State government is kind of acting in a kind of blissful ignorance of what is coming down the line. Right. This has gone on in the summer of 25, whereas the ultra unionists who had been paranoid as anything about the Boundary Commission.
Unionist paranoid?
So James Craig, which is I thought was a great quote, he described the Boundary Commission as the root of all evil in a letter to Churchill in May 22. So I've decided that quote I'll be using my book.
Have you got a book out, Cormac?
I do. They're coming out next month.
Right. The root of all evil.
That's the root of all evil.
The Boundary Commission is the root of all evil.
Well, the Northern government thought that things were settled with the Government of Ireland Act. You had their permanent final solution, as they described it. And
so they see this as a potential sword of Damocles hanging over them.
Completely. But it was a Damocles hanging over them. It was a big threat to them. Right. Particularly when it was started off, and the way it was if say for example Michael Collins and Arthur Griffith had survived, they both died in August 22. They were the main signatories on the Irish Free State side. If they had survived, the interpretation would have been seen very differently. I think if they had survived, and the British signatories, it was very clear that they fooled, or whatever you want to call it, convinced Sinn Féin that there would be big territory going to the Free State side. Sinn Féin would not have signed it otherwise.
Yeah, so they wouldn't have signed the treaty unless they thought they were getting...
exactly. So Lloyd George,
Yeah, and then that would inevitably lead to a United Ireland down the line because
I've never bought that count. I never bought that argument.
No.
Why would it? Why? Say if you look at the economic argument saying that the Northern Ireland needs 6 counties, but the economic kind of success of Northern Ireland was based around Belfast and its hinterlands. It wasn't based in Tyrone or Fermanagh. So I think Northern Ireland could have survived politically and particularly economically if they lost some territory. And Belfast actually would have become a bigger and more important city. If it lost, say, Newry or Derry, it would have actually had more control, you could say.
Well, it's arguable that a 4-county state was entirely secure forever and ever and ever, never mind a century.
But, so yeah, that would have actually weakened the argument for United Ireland, perhaps. Yeah,
but would it not have been the argument that if you lose Fermanagh, you're a 4-county statelet? I mean, it's kind of it's so too small to be viable. But I suppose if you go with Luxembourg,
Yeah, Vatican.
Vatican
They're a bit different.
comparable. No, that's okay.
But yes, so this is in the 21. So the unions definitely feared it, and they were really paranoid about the Boundary Commission and the damage it could do. But James Craig had been in a British government. So during the 1919, he was actually the assistant to the Lord Admiralty, who happened to be Walter Long, who was the chairman of the Government of Ireland committee, basically. He was the main architect of the Government of Ireland Act, Walter Long, but he was very sick. So actually, Craig was actually stepping in for him in British government affairs. He knew all the players here, and this was, he still knew all the government players and even politicians from other parties in 24, 23, 24. Right. And these are crucial years. This is when the Boundary Commission decided, not necessarily when it met, but who's going to be on the Boundary Commission. And even the British political system made sure it was only going to tinker with small little changes territory, not wholesale. So Craig had done his homework. He knew the political system in England. He worked it. He worked the British media. They were all on his side. And then you got Fisher, who... So the very first meeting of the Boundary Commission, November 24, the three of them agreed everything be confidential. But the minute that was over, he was talking to Robert Lynn, who was a pressman in the north and a politician, telling them what was happening. And then he had his correspondence with Florence Reid. She was wife of David Reid, who was a Ulster Unionist MP, and he was writing letters to her, every single week, pretty much, giving her an update of what was happening, what was going on in the Boundary Commission. And it was very clear from the early summer of 25 that, look, it was going to be it was actually probably going to benefit Northern Ireland in terms of they were going to get parts of Rich Donegal, get rid of South Armagh, get rid of Crossmaglen, and so it's actually, there's no mischief will be done by. That's what he said to her. So you notice the language of Ulster Unionist MPs and politicians in summer has changed dramatically. They're okay with the Boundary Commission now. They're okay with it because they know what's coming down the track.
So they've somebody on the inside basically saying, "Don't worry about this. We're going to tinker around the edges. There aren't going to be plebiscites. There aren't going to be huge movements of people, and the border is going to more or less remain where it is." Yeah. And then the Southern government have Owen McNeill wandering around the border, looking at dolmens and looking up.
Well, that's a bit unfair because there was a rumour that he went up to. They were meant to be meeting in Derry, and he just went off to Inishowen to look at some ancient relic, but actually they all went, and it was the mayor of Derry who invited them up there. But the rumour, because of this, and this is later said about McNeill, because he was so detached and so almost professorally almost, and he was not engaging with the real world.
But we're being unfair on him. That's not necessarily true.
Well, it's untrue that he went off by himself to see the relic in Inishowen.
But apparently he didn't take that much part in the actual
he needed
submissions and stuff. He wasn't asking questions. He wasn't banging on him, banging the table and going, well, what about bits of Fermanagh? We want those back for the Republic and all of that. He didn't do any of that. He was kind of very detached. Is that the right?
Yeah, he was detached. He was distant and detached. So this time 100 years ago, the Boundary Commission was sitting. It was meeting. So it met from early March 25 up until early July 25. Right. There was a break in between for the Northern Ireland Parliament election.
Are these for sort of public meetings and private submissions, or were there public meetings, or were there?
No, there weren't public meetings. So they were all you have to submit evidence, and then you have to be invited. So it started off in Armagh. They went to Down, then it went to Enniskillen, then to Derry, then to Omagh. And it was like they were meeting every morning, every afternoon, pretty much. Sometimes they went to see different areas just to get further evidence. I think they met about 575 people. Like, it was a big number, a lot of people, and some of them you should see some of the transcripts. They're all available as well on the
Public Record Office.
No, the National Archives of the UK, but online. You don't have to go to Kew in London. You can, you can see all the submissions online and the interviews. So if you look at each person or group submission, you have the initial statement by them, and then you have all the questions. The questions from generally feed them, and this is where you see the engagement of McNeill and Fisher. So you look at all the interviews, and Feetham is totally dominating the proceedings. You literally have little tidbits here and there, if at all, from McNeill or Fisher. They rarely talk at all during these interviews. And some of the questions by McNeill were just absurd. They have no bearing on the boundary. Like, he was talking to some guy about grain in America and which grain is better for growing, and you're going like, where is this going? And it doesn't go anywhere. It just trails off. And then, he's just curious. And you go like, what was he doing here? Like, he just doesn't seem to be engaged. He's not pushed, definitely not pushing the nationalist side, which, nationalists presumed he was meant to be there for. So it was very bizarre, his performance.
Well, so let's look at some people say, oh, this is a unionist stitch-up, but I mean, the nationalists have really, the balls this up from beginning to end. Agreeing to Article 12 without getting a lawyer to go, hang on a minute, what is economic?
Well, there was a lawyer who said to Arthur Griffith in John O'Byrne at the time of signing the treaty, said, there's a lot of danger in this economic geographic conditions. This can be interpreted different ways. Are you sure you want this in? And then there's no mention of it from Griffith afterwards. So,
So they agreed to it in the first place. Secondly, they by the time the Boundary Commission meets, they've had a civil war. They're a bit knackered. They're a bit skint. They've other things on their mind. They're kind of survival mode.
I don't agree by that.
You don't buy that?
They were committed to the Boundary Commission. Absolutely, they spent a huge amount of money.
Well, then why did they
resources,
appoint Owen McNeill?
Well, we blame Cosgrave for that. Cosgrave does not come out of this well. Cosgrave is actually there was a guy called Kevin O'Shiel. President of the Executive Council was his title in. But he basically wanted someone close to him, someone who was in the cabinet, and someone who was from Ulster, and someone who was a Catholic. So there was 2 people from Ulster in the cabinet.
But there's only 7 people in the cabinet.
Only 7 people, but 2 were from Ulster. One was Ernest Bly, and the other was Owen McNeill. Ernest Bly was a Protestant, so that's why they went with Owen McNeill. Kevin O'Shiel, he was the director of the North Eastern Boundary Bureau. This is a body created by Cosgrave, created by the government to compile data and present the case. And it did a Trojan work. There's about 64 boxes of files in the National Archives of Ireland from the North Eastern Boundary Bureau. They did Trojan work, and they were committed to getting as much territory as possible from Northern Ireland, essentially. And the Free State government backed them. This was supported by the Free State government. They were all very much behind this.
So this is a kind of a Southern Boundary Commission, effectively.
No, it's for the Boundary. This is the body that was set up to prepare for the Boundary Commission.
Right.
For a very specific purpose, and it was advising government ministers. It was producing memos.
And what were they hoping to get? What were they?
Well, they had a maximum minimum line. The minimum line was pretty much almost like 4 counties. So the maximum line was a lot better. Even and way off, obviously, what happened.
Right.
So they were very naive. They were very naive in terms of they didn't understand the Ulster Unionist mindset. They didn't realise that Ulster Unionists hated Dublin more than they loved the British Empire.
Yeah.
And that was not just a fault of the North Eastern Boundary Bureau or Cosgrave. Had been a fault of De Valera. It'd been a fault of Collins. Had been a fault of Griffith.
Yeah.
They never got.
They don't get unions.
No, they never got unions. They didn't know unions. They just didn't know.
Well,
them.
that's it. They don't know any.
But in fairness, Joe Devlin did though. Joe Devlin was dealing with unions all his life, and he understood the Ulster Unionist mindset better. And he wasn't considered to be, or spoken to.
Yeah.
And he should have been. People who were on the ground in Ulster who had to deal with Ulster Unionist politics every day. They should have been consulted, And Cahir Healy, he was an MP in Fermanagh, a Nationalist MP, and he said, that there was a problem from the start. That they just didn't get the Ulster Unionist mindset. They didn't get the dangers that were there. So you have these guys advising. They're a bit like blind because the Boundary Commission can be interpreted in so many different ways. And they go on what happens in Europe and all the precedents, boundary commissions there. But they do a lot of work. It's a lot of preparation, really good work, really, and good people as well are working for them. And the Free State government were committed to it. But they made a fatal error, yes, obviously agreeing to the wording of the Boundary Commission and in appointing McNeill. McNeill was a terrible choice. Kevin O'Shiel, the director of the North Eastern Boundary Bureau, he said there's one man who I think he knows politics inside out. He knows that, he'll back our case. When we ask him to do something, he'll do it. And his name is James McNeill. He was the High Commissioner in London, and he happened to be the brother of Owen McNeill. But he wasn't appointed, it was Owen appointed, and Owen was a terrible choice.
You're listening to the Irish History Boys with me, Tim McGarry, and Dr. Cormac Moore. We're discussing the Boundary Commission and the headline in the Irish News of April 1925 about Fermanagh Nationalists making their case to the Boundary Commission. If you have any comments or you'd like to ask us anything or disagree with anything that Cormac Moore says, obviously you wouldn't disagree with anything I've said, give us we are on WhatsApp. You feel free to message us on 07483 313 842. That's 07483.
Plus 353 if you're in the south.
You just interrupted me giving out a number there. Now you're going to confuse everybody. 07483 313 842. The Boundary Commission. So you say they made a mistake agreeing to the terms. They made a mistake appointing Owen McNeill. There's a lot of Northern Nationalists subsequently think we were abandoned by the South. There was a partitionist mindset. Is there a mindset down south that sees the North as too much hassle? Was that evident in 25. They're going, do we really want them? Do we really want them?
No,
You know?
I mean, maybe some people did. Yeah, there was one guy, J.J. Walsh. He was a postmaster general in the Free State. And, he felt, it was better until we purify ourselves almost. We have our, Catholic state. With the Irish language, Catholic Church, become, and then we can talk about United Ireland. So some people were okay with it, but they were in a minority though. I think. But even if Cosgrave or O'Higgins or whoever's in the government weren't that committed to it, and I do think they were committed to it, by the way. And their actions and even their private correspondence at the time shows that they were committed to get as much charity as possible.
Is there not a quote from Cosgrave when St Johnson and bits of Donegal were supposed to go to that he was going, we can't give our people to the north? And people go, whoa, when did our people become just on that side of the border?
No, and he does late in 25 when he realised this is going pear-shaped. He does use that language. We have done well for our citizens. So then it becomes this othering of northern nationalists. And he wouldn't allow them to come to the Dáil Gallery even or speak after the agreement was signed in December 25. Which left the boundary as it was. There was a change then from late 25, but up to it becomes pear-shaped, which happens pretty much from November 25. Right. They're still committed to get as much territory as possible, and from all their correspondence. That is apparent, and including Cosgrave, and key figures. But they're on a lot of pressure as well because the Republicans obviously lost the Civil War, but they did very well in the August 23 election. They did a lot better than people expected. So they were, building their political power. But also a lot of Free State supporters wanted as much territory as possible. This was a very difficult issue for them. So they were from a lot of internal pressure as well to deliver as much as possible. So they were committed, but they made a lot of cardinal errors. As we mentioned, the agreeing to the wording of the treaty, agreeing to the appointment of Owen McNeill, and then not understanding, what was at play here, or the dynamics of Ulster Unionists in particular, or even British politics. They trusted British politicians too much as well. They thought that British politicians were acting good faith, and they were not. And so they made a lot of very naive critical errors at big junctures, which was one of the main reasons why it ended up the way it ended up.
So in April 25, here are a bunch of nationalists in Fermanagh and Skillen making a submission saying we should be part of a free state. Yeah.
Just one thing I wanted to say though, just about the Northern Nationalists always blamed, the Free State government, abandoned us, they didn't get us back to this. But it was, in some ways, the Nationalists in the North were asking for too much that wasn't in the power of the Free State government to give. They're kind of the Northern Nationalists asked for, we want all of Fermanagh and Tyrone, and we want Newry and Derry City. But so if you're basing it on, if you want all of Fermanagh and Tyrone, so then you're basing it on a county basis. So you're deciding the size to be determined in each county. So if that's the case, you can only get Fermanagh and Tyrone. You can't get Newry or Derry City. But then if you're going for you want Newry and you want Derry, so then you have to have a smaller unit to be transferred. Like a poor law union or a district electrical area. So that means you're going to lose parts of Fermanagh and Tyrone because they have unionist majorities, different poor law unions.
Right,
so the Nationalists were being unrealistic as well, and they expected too much from the Free State that wasn't in the power for the Free State to give. There is that's important to make as well, that point, that the Free State government were trying hard. They made a lot of mistakes, but they were trying hard, and that often wasn't appreciated by Nationalists, that they actually were trying their best, and they had a stacked card against them though in many respects.
So there's a certain level of naivety and unrealistic expectations if Nationalists are making these submissions and the Free State government is expecting big changes in the Boundary Commission. Yeah. And it all comes to naught. I mean, it literally comes to nothing. It comes to tinkering around the edges.
But the Free State are waves of Article 5, though, which is the public debt of the UK, which was agreed in the treaty, which is another reason why Northern Nationalists, and it's particularly the main reason I think why Northern Nationalists resent the whole Boundary Commission fiasco, is that no territory was changed. There was the border remains as it was, but the Free State government it was waived of having to pay public debt, which could have been £150 million at the time, over the lengthy period of time to pay it back.
So just to go back to the Boundary Commission eventually reports, and it doesn't get to issue its report.
Yeah, not publicly. Yeah,
its report is leaked to the
Morning Post.
Morning Post,
A
which is
die-hard conservative newspaper, yeah.
And it is very accurate. It's not entirely accurate, but it's very accurate.
Very
It basically
close,
said there are going to be tiny little bits of the north going to the south and bits of the south going to the north, including around St Johnson and Donegal. And
Yeah,
like
Pettigo and
Pettigo.
Northbound as well, yeah.
And this causes horror, outrage and shock in the Irish, with the Irish government.
Yeah.
They didn't see it coming at all.
No, they didn't. And even it was what was bizarre about it, we'll talk about this obviously, when the club's closer to the weeks in November. So the report is leaked November 7th to Morning Post, and then so nothing happens with the Irish government for a week or two. But it's when the border nationalists started meeting the Irish government and complaining, and actually causing an uproar, like having protest meetings and meeting their local politicians, and then going to the government buildings and meeting Cosgrave and McNeill and so on. That's when McNeill goes, "Oh, I have to resign from the Boundary Commission." So he doesn't resign straight away. He resigns in November 20th. Right. After he realizes, wow, this is a bit of a hot potato here, this political issue. But he'd agreed to an award in September, as early as September, and particularly by October, I think 17th was the date. The basic award was agreed upon with him, so he knew this was going to happen. And
why did he not resign then?
He thought it was going to be more controversial if he resigned or gave a minority report than actually. What the award was bizarre. Like everything McNeill does is bizarre. But if we go back to what's happening 100 years ago, another mistake that Nationalists make. So you had all these witness statements. So you had all these interviews happening at this time 100 years ago. This week it's Enniskillen, moves on to I think Derry next, and then Noma. So it's interesting that the Nationalists focus their kind of evidence on the wishes of the inhabitants.
Yeah.
That was a flaw as well, because
basically there's more takes here, basically, so we should be
But there was loads of evidence there anyway. There was no need for them to focus on that, because that evidence. They want the plebiscite, and that was another mistake again by the Sinn Féin. They should have insisted upon a plebiscite, because that would have made it more difficult to not transfer areas to the south. But there was no plebiscite. That was Feetham decided that in late 24. But then they starts giving census figures, to give election results, and they give obviously witness statements and all of that for different areas. But the Boundary Commission already had all the information. They had all of the census results from 1911. They had all the election results. So it was well known that these areas that were up for debate, what the profile, the demographics was of each area. But what the unions focus on was on economic and geographic conditions. And that played into where Feetham was at. And again, this comes back to where's Fisher in all of this? Is Fisher feeding this information to all the unions, like focus on geographic, economic things? We all know the demographics, so you need to change your argument. You need to focus in on what's important for Feetham here. And I think that there's something there in that.
So did Feetham basically write the report himself?
Yeah, but it was Fisher and Feetham were on the same page.
Yeah.
They both. Fisher was delighted with the report. He wrote a letter to because he was leaking like a sieve, basically. Everything that was happening in the Boundary Commission. He wrote a letter to Carson when they had agreed a report in October, saying, "I think you'd be very happy with my work here. I've done you. I've done you proud, basically." So this was happening. But the unions also focused their when they did talk about wishes of inhabitants, they thought they were more important than Nationalists in many respects, because they were richer, they had paid more rates, they were business people, or they had better land, and they were more permanent, they were permanently in places. Yeah. Now that was countered by Nationalists saying that, you've actually put in a lot of specials in our areas who now are on the voting register, and they're not permanent, they're on temporary assignments here, or so we're led to believe.
This is the B specials and the C specials.
C specials, exactly, yeah. So there was that was countered, but some of the language used by unions as well was so racist almost, and stereotypical of the lazy Irish Catholic. One guy called John Scott, he was a unionist in Derry, and he was going, they're all coming over from the border, they all stay in one room, about 8 or 9, like in the family. The whole of Derry will go idle if it's left off to those people. Oh, right, people. So we pay more rates. We're the people employing all these Catholics.
That has echoes today in certain politics in the UK and here.
Yeah. But back then it wasn't just an Northern Ireland thing. It was this whole idea, like if you pay more rates, you should have a big vote. The one man, one vote all before that campaign. This was happening. And it was prevalent, and Feetham actually did say, there's merit to that argument, particularly on the permanent residency thing. He thought that a lot of Catholics were coming over from the other side of the border for temporary jobs, summer jobs, working on farms, picking fruit, and all of that, and they weren't staying. So they had less of a say, or should have less of a say than permanent residents. Yeah, so.
Well, it's interesting the argument we make about whether the South was becoming partitionist, because there's a brilliant article that I want to read from the Irish News on the same day from 1925, and it's G.K. Chesterton, very famous writer, most famous for his Father Brown detective stories, and he was writing an article in his G.K. Weekly, which is rapidly becoming one of the most eagerly discussed social, political and literary reviews published. And I'll tell you what he thinks about, and this is an Englishman, and what his reviews on Ireland are in 1925. Conditions in Ireland are difficult for us to judge, and we should always remember that the North is as much a mystery to us as the South. Among the many crimes of the party system, one of the worst was the suggestion that the Orange man is a sort of Englishman, or to us, still more maddening suggestion that the Englishman is a sort of Orange man. But it is vitally necessary to remember that Ireland is a nation, especially in dealing with the Irishmen who deny it. At any moment they may do something quite unexpected and to us quite unintelligible. Isn't that lovely? It's this kind of Englishman's attitude to what is going on here. I don't really understand them. Northern Irish people pretending that they are saying that they are British, but we don't really regard them as British. Is that? Do
you remember that Ali G sketch with Sammy Wilson?
Yes.
You're British. Why are you doing over here?
Are you just visiting here? Yeah, are you just visiting? I think he's saying.
Yeah, there is. And you go to London. It doesn't matter where you're from on the island of Ireland. You're Irish.
But you go back to the Home Rule crisis, and sometimes we think the Home Rule crisis is just Carson and the Ulster Covenant and the UVF and all that. But they had massive support across the UK. There were massive rallies in favour of anti-Home Rule, and very pro-empire, obviously, pre-First World War. But there was massive political support for the Unionist cause among the British establishment. And not just the British, among the British public. But yes, you still have this kind of underlying attitude that we're a bit different, really, aren't we?
Yeah, but they find it difficult often to distinguish between Unionists and Nationalists, and the rest of the island, because they're not aware of what was going on. Yes, the Home Rule crisis and Irish politics is dominant in British political discourse for decades, and there are a lot of politicians back then that were really committed to the Ulster Unionist cause. Andrew Bonar Law, we mentioned before, he definitely was. He was a zealot of Ulster Unionism, and so was Arthur Balfour. Many of them were and around the time of the Boundary Commission, this time in 25, they're all still there. They're all still, and mine are friends. They're friends with James Craig. I remember James Craig was in the British government. Edward Carson was
in the cabinet.
Was in the cabinet. He was considered to be a leader of the Conservative Party at one stage before Bonar Law got the job. So they're well in there. And Carson lives in England at this time. I know he's outside of president or full-time politics, but he's still involved, and he's still meeting Churchill, he's still meeting Balfour. They're coming to his house. He's meeting Lord Birkenhead. They had a big tiff over the treaty, but they think they got over it. But they're still meeting, and so they're still engaged, and they know the system well. But you still have this thing that the English public, we're talking about earlier about the Boundary Commission, the North Eastern Boundary Bureau. There's a guy called Bolton Waller. He was the main advisor on international boundaries, but he went over to England, and he just kind of was testing the general public about the Boundary Commission and Ireland. I said, I don't care, it's not coming up.
We're not as important as we like to think, are we?
Yeah, exactly. So there's always this thing that Ireland is different, and it's definitely not in school books. The history of Ireland never comes up, and that was certainly the case 100 years ago. Still is, and obviously that resonates with today. We Brexit. When the vote happened, it was a kind of an afterthought. Oh, actually, there is a border, and this has consequences. Oh, we should have thought about that, But they don't care about Ireland, and Ulster Unionists today, one day it might dawn on them, after so many times where the British have shown total disregard and total ignorance of what happens in Ireland.
Well, what was
maybe they might change their strategies.
There's a certain other history podcast called The Racist History, very good podcast, which I like. But they covered Ireland, but the two of them admitted, Mr. Holland and Mr. Sandbrook, before they covered it, said they learnt nothing about Irish history at school and knew very little about it, and brought guys in to discuss it.
Paul Rouse was there,
and said literally, that's one the gaps in their knowledge, that they'd no real understanding of Irish history and what its effect was on British history. And I think
and it was a big effect. And once you do look at it, it's really important for what happens in Britain as well. But it's always been kind of over there, different. You know, even like Ireland, the whole of Ireland was part of the United Kingdom from the Act of Union 1800. But it was treated separately. You know, it had a chief secretary. You know, it was administered differently than the rest
Scotland
of Britain.
or Wales,
So it was there always was this difference, even though we were meant to be united as one nation, and Dublin was meant to be the second city of the empire. What was it ever really? You know?
If we go then to where we are now, and the Boundary Commission establishes Northern Ireland as the sixth county state, there's an argument to say that partition has worked to the extent for that. In the extent that we have created two states, that down south we've become far more distant from the south. They have a different culture down there. They have different newspapers. They have different report. They have different radio presenters. They don't even know who Stephen Nolan is down south. Different sports. Different partition.
Sports.
But there's down in terms of the Republic of Ireland football team. That there's a partitionist mindset, and that the north is a place apart. It's a place apart for the English. We see that attitude there that it's part of the United Kingdom, but it isn't really. And it's part of Ireland, but it isn't really. Is it for a lot of people down south?
Yeah, I think so. Like that came up. I remember during the. Do you remember that controversy over the RIC controversy? The Irish.
Oh yes, they were going to do a
commemoration
of the centenary of the RIC.
So and there was a big backlash against that. It really was. It was just before the general election was announced in 2020, and it was a big issue during the election, particularly the start of it. Anyway, the campaign. But the debate in Ireland when it talked about policing back then was the RAC, and then it was the Black and Tans and the auxiliaries, and they were mainly functioning around the south. You know, the Munster and Leinster essentially. You know, and parts of Connacht and so on. But then there was hardly any mention of specialists. You know, and the specialists were part of the RIC. So they were under the Chief Commissioner in Ulster of the RAC, but no one mentioned specialists back then hardly. You know, like people in Ireland. I've written a lot about Weaver Street during the bomb on Weaver Street in 22, where children were playing on the street and a bomb was literally thrown to where it could cause maximum damage. 4 kids died, 2 women died, and no one knows that in the south. No one knows about that. They all know about Bloody Sunday in Croke Park, or what happened, the burning of Cork City and so on. But there is this, and even you look at some textbooks, history textbooks. It has the history of Ireland from 1922 onwards, which is just the south. So there definitely is the further, but that's everywhere though. The further you were from an amphitheatre or a theatre of conflict or of a history, there's less knowledge the further away you go. But it is there is a bit of that in Ireland.
What I'm saying, my point is, we shouldn't necessarily be laughing at G.K. Chester and going, what is Ulster and who are they? They're all strange people, aren't they? Because that is an attitude even that we have on the island itself, that people down south. I knew people down south who wouldn't go to Belfast during the Troubles because we're all madmen up here and we're.
Oh yeah, you still hear that.
You still hear that.
They're different up there, you know. Yeah. And it was called the Black North, in the 1900s. Like Tim Healy, you mentioned earlier, he was Governor General of he was the guy that said cheat and feed him, that phrase. And he was the first Governor General of Free State. He said 900. He went up to Belfast one day, and it was the worst day of his life. He'll never go back there again. What a god awful place, So there was this type of impression that was different. It was a place apart, as has been coined before. That phrase.
So Unionists are right then. We are a place apart. Unionists are right. It's different from.
So the you think
it's important to say on an Irish News sponsored podcast that Unionists are right. The North is different from the rest of the island.
Well, there definitely was differences that Ulster had that other places didn't have. But then Ulster was different. Different parts of Ulster were different than say Belfast.
Yeah.
So Fermanagh and Tyrone would have had a lot more in common with places in Connacht or Munster or Leinster than would have at Belfast. So Ulster or what became Northern Ireland, there are a lot of differences within that area as well. So when we talk about Ulster, are we just talking about Belfast and its hinterlands, or are we talking about the whole 6 counties? And then you're opening up another can of worms there. So so it's complicated, should we say?
It's complicated.
There's multiple, and even within unionism, this whole idea that they were all absolutely belligerent and stubborn and wouldn't give an inch. There was a lot of debate within unionism that maybe there should be some compromises. And within nationalism, there's a lot of debates going on as well. There's a big difference between Belfast-based nationalists and nationalists based in Tyrone, Fermanagh, for example. So there's a whole multiple layers of identities going on here, and multiple political forces at play happening at the same time, often with divergent views who are meant to be in the same camp, for want of a better term. So it's complicated.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that G.K. Chesterton basically pointing out that English people had very little in common with Ulster Unionists.
Yeah.
And basically consider them Irish, no matter what.
Well, that has prevailed, hasn't it?
That's still
if you go, the accent is Irish accent, whether you're from the north or the south, and people in the UK consider us Irish. You've very few people go, "Oh, you're from the north or south?" Just go, "You're Irish."
Try and use a Bank of Ireland tenor in England, and you end up explaining the constitutional position of Northern Ireland in order to buy a Mars bar.
And the work just get lost.
They go, "It's not sterling." It is money sterling. So most people don't really know or care about the.
Do you know what you should do? Be part of an All Ireland, but you'll have the Euro instead. So.
Do you think that would be the solution? Yeah, I'll suggest that to somebody then, Cormac.
Suggest that to somebody. See what they say. Yeah.
Well, you're from County Laois, aren't you? One of the finest
Laois,
counties in Ireland. I don't think I've ever been to County Laois.
The heart of Ireland.
Have I driven
right in the
through?
centre, the epicentre of Ireland. You've probably driven through it. If you've drove from Dublin to Cork, you've definitely driven through Laois.
Right.
It's
So would the people of Laois have much in common with the people of the 6 counties? Would they have?
Well,
do they worry about us?
It depends on which people from Laois you talk to and which people from 6 counties you talk to. So multiple identities, no matter where you go. And do you know what's important to remember as well now? The whole thing of identity has changed fundamentally from what it was 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Not just that, there was 66% Protestant in the north, 32% Catholic, but now there's a lot of people who don't identify as any religion, and there's many people who were not born in the island. That has changed. That whole profile of the whole island has changed completely. That kind of part of the population that were not born in the island and from different backgrounds is a big percentage now, and will have a decisive say when there is a border poll. That was not an issue back 100 years ago.
No, and we forget that religion was very, very important at that time. The power of the Catholic Church, for instance, was very powerful right up until the 90s and the child abuse scandals. Effectively, they were still.
Well, it started with Eamon Casey. I remember it was Eamon Casey that affair with Anne Rice and having the child.
That's right. Yeah.
Or Annie Murphy, sorry, and that was kind of when, and then it all snowballed. All the child sex abuse came out, and that was the 90s. Before then, the South was a very, very Catholic country.
Yeah, and it's all changed now.
Changed utterly.
Utterly. That's a good way to end it. All is changed utterly. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening to the Irish History Boys. We'll be back next week. In the meantime, thank you very much.
See you all then.
See you.